We're coming, and we ain't backing down.
We don't need a bunch of cats in here looking in the mirror.
Everybody just do your job. You understand that?
Hey, will you shut up?
I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today.
Guys being dudes.
And they run through our like through a tin horn, man.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Split Zone Duo. My name is Alex Kirshner. We've got two of us this week. Would you like to introduce yourself?
We're still doing the special guest bit? We killed that a long time ago,
We
didn't
did kill that a long time ago. But Stephen Godfrey.
My name is Stephen Godfrey. Yeah, that's me, at 30 at Godfrey. You know me. If you're a patron at splitzoneduo.com, you've already heard my voice probably once in the last 24 hours as I rambled about Oregon.
As Richard says, every podcast is somebody's first. We're all scrambling around the holiday season. The gang of three of us should be back together for many a future episode, but it's just Godfrey and me this week. Richard, hope you're not listening. Hope you're doing something else. I don't know. The number one recruit in the country, this is Wednesday that we are recording this. The number one recruit per Rivals. You know, there's like 4 or 5 number one recruits now in any given year. Travis Hunter, a cornerback, longtime commit to Florida State, also can play wide receiver, considered, I think, to just be a great athlete, has flipped from Florida State to Jackson State. Not to be confused with Jacksonville State, the team that beat Florida State earlier this year.
Right.
Sorry, that was a cheap shot. Jackson State, I think Godfrey has just pulled off something unprecedented. I don't think that, certainly in the recruiting rankings era, like since we have done recruiting the way we do recruiting, that anything like this has ever happened before.
Not to my knowledge. Basketball has seen this happen before, but this would be a first for football. Now, the problem is, as we say this, it sounds monumental on its face, but Alex, there's a reason why this, I guess consensus, let's just call him the number one, whatever. The number one recruit in the class has flipped from a legacy Power 5 program with national championships in the modern era to a SWAC school in the FCS. Why is that, Alex?
It is widely theorized that this is more of a twofold Deion Sanders and name, image, and likeness thing than it is a sea change in HBCU recruiting. Though I think there is something to it that Jackson State has drastically improved its fortunes by being really good this year. And they're going to play for the HBCU D1 National Championship in the Celebration Bowl on Saturday. But this is a marker. I don't want to start going on about how this means that we're going to see all these changes in college football, because I think it's more a symptom than a cause of those changes. But it is a thing of a new era for sure. No matter, and I think we'd like to give the young man a little bit more time to elaborate on what he's doing, but I don't think that this would have happened in 2016, 2017. No.
Couple fun things before we go any further. Normally, again, on the patron shows, when we're going through breaking coach news or something that's going on with realignment, we usually call out the date and time of our recording because these stories are so fluid and they're developing in multiple areas at the same time. So it is, we'll do God's time zone, 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon as we are sitting here talking, Alex Kirshner. So I don't feel like we have a complete picture on exactly what's going to happen. So if you hear this at a later date and we don't hit upon a particular point, it's probably because it hasn't happened yet as we record this. So if we were to create a theme for this segment for what's going on, because we had a full run of show and then this happened today, we moved it up to the A slot. It would be that in no way, shape, or form should anyone be jumping to create blanket statements about anything we're about to talk about. So as far as I'm concerned, the smartest way to approach this discussion topic and this news is that it is, as far as I'm concerned for now, an isolated incident. It is not the beginning of the end. It is not a reason why we should cancel NIL. It is not what college football is going to look like in the future. These are extreme. These are a set of extreme circumstances taking place.
Very much so. And if the thing that the internet is widely speculating actually happened and was a driving factor in this, then we'll get to that. But I think the thing to know is that is a very, very Deion Sanders specific thing that might be hard to replicate in other places. So this is at this point extremely thinly to not really at all sourced. And I think that Twitter has maybe gotten a little bit ahead of itself at this point on this, but the idea...
Twitter
Twitter would never do that. But the idea is that Deion Sanders has his own podcast deal with Barstool Sports, which is owned by Penn National Gaming, which is a gambling operation. And the speculated thing is that Travis Hunter, the number one recruit, may have some kind of burgeoning relationship, perhaps for some kind of media operation like a documentary, with the same media company that already works with his future head coach. Makes sense. Don't get me wrong. We do a lot of dot connecting in this world, and it definitely makes sense. We're going to talk about that kind of deal because we've seen some things along that line over the last couple of weeks, and we will probably see more. But we always use those therapy words, Godfrey. I think, I feel, I know. This is going to be some I feel rather than some I know, because we want to talk about the thing that everyone's talking about, but would prefer not to get way ahead of the apple cart here and then upset it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, that's why I preface this by saying we're going to explore the topic. We're going to figure out in real time, again, what 90% of this industry does is they want to race to create a summary and a sort of mission statement moving forward. I really don't think that a lot of this could be replicated without some key players involved. Therefore, I don't believe it to be the emergence of some evil trend.
Pete Thamel of Yahoo reported earlier today, Wednesday, that there is, quote, a strong feeling around college football that a significant NIL deal proved the driver, end quote, in getting Travis Hunter to Jackson State from Florida State. Again, let's talk about what that might look like, just sort of in very broad strokes. We make very marketable properties out of athletes these days. Athletes are very commoditized in a lot of ways. And if you are a media company like Barstool Sports, there can be a lot of value for you in having a pretty strong association with not only a number one recruit, but I think a number one recruit in this situation. And I think that this is, if it turned out that it's a Barstool deal, I think there are some Barstool specific factors. If it turns out that it's another kind of NIL deal, I think that some of the same factors would be in play.
Yes.
In Barstool's case, the company has a well-deserved reputation for misogyny and racism. This is sort of a reputation laundering tool, not to say at all that the athlete doesn't immensely deserve to get paid, but it looks good to support an HBCU and an HBCU athlete. If for some reason Barstool wanted to do something like make a documentary that tracked Travis Hunter's journey in college, and also showed some of the wonderful things that are going on Jackson State's campus, well, that would be good for the player. That would be good for the school. And that's one way in which it would be good for the media company, especially.
Yes. Reputation laundering, I think, would be the key. That would explain, I think, why the outside company would come in this heavy and this hard. It's also just for the sake of creating and owning a media narrative to their end. When you're in the kind of business that Barstool's in, you have to constantly create your own oxygen. It is your fuel, because if you don't have oxygen, you can't burn a fire. And if nothing's burning at Barstool, then no one's paying attention. It is it's not a tactic that's really unique to them. You see it really, honestly, in ideologue political media, heterodox or left or right or
you do
really any of that stuff, where you have to be fomenting rage or outrage or there must be indignity at all times. In their case, it skews a little bit more towards scandal or really anything that could cause the passive viewer, consumer of sports media to check them out for some reason, okay? This also will probably work for them as a wonderful bulwark against, of course we're not prejudiced, of course we're not racist, look at this. We have this HBCU athlete, this relationship with an HBCU coach. It's very convenient, which is sort of the Deion factor in this. This was kind of what we all assumed when Deion took the job, that Jackson State wouldn't, well, I'll put it this way. Deion wasn't going to factor into Jackson State's future. Jackson State was going to factor into Deion's future, which is exactly what's happening now. This is also why it's sensational news, but it's designed to be right now. And it's why I don't know how I really don't know how you replicate this. So, walking distance from me here in Nashville, Alex, we have Eddie George at Tennessee State. I don't see this happening at Tennessee State just because they have a famous ex-NFL player at a majority, technically HBCU. They don't play in the SWAC, though. But, it's not like this model is going to crop up overnight. So if we're going to start whacking the head off of various outrage narratives, the first one is, these schools are just going to pay their way through and suddenly make themselves relevant, and black schools, because the majority of college players are black, are going to have some sort of ideological advantage. No, that's not true. That's not true.
I think that would be a big leap to a conclusion that we have.
That was always my sticking.
Yeah,
there was a famous essay in the Atlantic by Jamel Hill a couple years ago, and that was always my sticking point with her argument that like athletes should just take up arms and go and flood the HBCUs with their talent. The problem is this: the HBCUs, whether fair or not, are not set up to showcase their talents and then therefore transition them into the kind of earning space that a Florida State or USC or Michigan could. And so you would essentially be sacrificing your own financial gain to do that. I think I stole that talking point maybe from Bomani Jones. So we'll keep going down this list, Alex, but that's the first thing I want to kill. This to me seems very isolated. That's number one.
I would agree with that. I think that's a Barstool specific situation where if that is the deal and if the internet gets what it wants, that's one isolated reason why it would make sense for the company. There'd also be kind of a vertical integration point there. I was talking about this a bit earlier today with our friend Matt Brown, who publishes the Extra Points newsletter about college sports business. That's at extrapointsmb.com. It's worth checking out. And the vertical integration point is that, and this is why I find this interesting and why I think it is actually like maybe a replicable model that might be relevant for the rest of college football, whether it's a Barstool deal or some other deal. If there's no deal, then I guess we move on to the next recruit. Barstool has a deal with Deion Sanders. He does a podcast for them. He does this while coaching a college football team, a good college football team. I don't know where he finds the time. If you make a deal with a football coach who you are already in a commercial relationship with, and that happens to help that football coach get a top football talent, that's going to make Jackson State a lot more marketable. You're probably going to see him on national TV next year. They will also be there on Saturday in the Celebration Bowl. It is going to help Deion Sanders' marketability in the industry. Like, he interviewed recently for TCU, according to a bunch of reporting. At some point, you're going to see Deion Sanders probably in a Power 5 coaching chair. And when that happens, can you escalate your relationship? Does it help to already have a business relationship if you're a media company like Barstool, not only with the coach, but perhaps now, if everyone's speculation comes true, with a player, with a star player who might be able to go with him in a world where transferring is easier than it's ever been before in college sports? Yeah, you could, like, in effect, it would make sense for a company, and in this case, the one that everyone's speculating about would be Barstool, but it could be it could be a rights holder in college sports to use NIL deals on the one hand to kind of boost properties that it has commercially, and that might help make its television properties more valuable. For instance, I think that is an actual thing that is worth watching over the next many couple of months. Still just a theory, but worth watching.
These are a wonderful set of hypotheticals. A wonderful set. I will leave the conversation with this, Alex. And if I sound clipped or paused or a little reserved, it's mainly just because this stuff's happening so fast that I don't really want to jump to conclusions. What is the value here? What is the actual value?
For whom?
If you're dealing with these, if you're buying into this, so let's walk this out. And let's say that you are some other TCU type program. I don't know. Just pick one. Let's say you're Florida State and you hire him in a couple years. I would have a hard time thinking that. Here's the biggest thing. Let me pause right here. Do you know what Florida State has that Jackson State doesn't? You know what TCU has that Jackson State doesn't? Fucking rights deals, bro.
Big ones.
Rights deals. Galore. One of the reasons that Deion is given such autonomy to operate the way he does is that there aren't millions, hundreds of millions of dollars at stake if he strays away from the particular terms of particular deals. Like, there is no SWAC network. So I have a hard time believing that if he goes to, let's just say, an ACC school, that he would be allowed to, really actually not allowed to, because you'd have to write it into the contract. Let me back up. A school would have to reckon with hiring Deion because they're going into business not with a subordinate, hiring a coach to fill a position, but you're actually contracting out a corporation that has its own media deals that would run concurrent to yours, and basically you would be, as an institution, creating content that rivals one another for different
it'd be weird.
different business partners. I'm trying to sew this together.
It'd be weird, but this is also why I think it's interesting.
That's just one thing that gives me pause about hiring Dion in the future.
Can I walk that out again though, and kind of
all right? Yeah. No, let's play it out. Let's try and figure out.
I'm going to remove it from this specific recruit because again, this is still all hypothetical, and like we're trying to talk about the thing without implying facts that we don't know about. Let's just use it. Let's use a different example. Let's say that Notre Dame in a couple of years decides that it's really comfortable swimming into the gray area in name, image, and likeness. Perish the thought. I know it's Notre Dame. I know that's not necessarily how they would like to see themselves doing business, but let's imagine. Notre Dame is in a unique position in major college football because it has one rights holder who works with it specifically, that being NBC. What if Notre Dame was trying to land a big fish recruit, number one type player, and it came to Notre Dame's advantage that Peacock wanted to do a docuseries following this recruit and his story, and that if Peacock did that and made a bigger star out of this player, that might in fact, this is again the vertical integration thing that I was talking about with Matt. Then suddenly, if you're a media company like NBC, again, totally hypothetical, you could boost the value of the thing that you televise every Saturday by kind of putting a story to a valuable player on that team. And Notre Dame might benefit greatly because Notre Dame could be getting a significant recruiting bounce. Notre Dame's broadcast partner could benefit from that, and the athlete could benefit from that. That's why this interested me. Whether or not like the internet's the internet's vision of this Travis Hunter deal comes to fruition is that there's a world where like media, NIL, school triangles of cooperation do become very much in play. I don't think that that's hard to imagine at all.
Do you know who's screaming into their podcast device or car stereo right now at you?
Don't tell me. All right, tell me.
The Aggies, my friend. The Aggies, and here's why. What you described was the doomsday scenario that was posited to people in the state of Texas when LHN went online. Actually, before LHN went online, when LHN was announced. This scenario that you just described was the 0 hour for the Aggies. And this is also cited as really the reason why not this current round of realignment. This was the Archduke for this was the thing, all right? Because what the Aggies foretold, and this is it's in the trailer to the documentary that TexAgs made. This was written about ad nauseum. I was hushed out of a interview by an LHN/ESPN publicist when I was writing about LHN years later because this was such a sensitive topic. So what they said was, Alex, what's to stop LHN from finding out? Let's just say this is like Katy is just I went to college with a guy who went to Katy High School in Houston. Katy's a football power, right? Katy, Texas?
Big time.
LHN finds out there's a 5-star athlete who's choosing between Texas and A&M and Oklahoma. Quarterback, right? Okay? And then LHN comes and does wall-to-wall coverage of Katy's high school playoff game. This was the fucking doomsday scenario, and yeah. there were legs. This was a reality. This is something that had to be discussed, and so it's funny that you brought that back around. Except here's the difference now.
Politics.
Well, there's more agency now on the side of the player because the player has some agency at all.
Right.
In this scenario I'm describing, which was sort of the oh fuck moment back in 2010. Everyone was concerned about Texas using this network as a sort of behemoth recruiting power that would have been unfair. Now we're talking about a deal at the outset where a recruit goes through this process, and essentially what recruiting becomes is something more akin to a corporate merger. Excuse me while I gag a little bit, but that's the reality, because what you're proposing is essentially the evolution of that doomsday prophecy by the by Texas A&M, and one of the reasons they just hauled ass to the SEC network. Now, there was a resolution on this, and that's that LHN, one of the things that I believe undercut LHN, other than the fact that it's incredibly fucking stupid to have a 24-hour cable network dedicated to one school, was that LHN could not do any preps coverage whatsoever. Now, imagine in the state of Texas how crippling that is. When I have friends who, like, we have colleagues who only cover Texas high school football for a fucking living 12 months a year. So now, here's my prediction, since we've walked this all the way out. I think your scenario is just it's the doomsday version 2.0, and this is where, God forbid, Lord, don't take me for saying this, we could actually use some oversight and legislation from an organized body to define what's inbounds and what's out of bounds. Because what my co-host here, has proposed is technically possible because the NCAA in all its feckless fucking glory hasn't done anything to set up guardrails.
No, and also to that point, one thing I was wondering about is, like, we're hypothetical. I want to keep saying that, and I'm not trying to do a wink-wink thing about it either. Like, I know that there's a specific deal happening with this player, but it just makes one think about the future of recruiting. Let's say that the most audacious deal imaginable is what's happening here, and then that Peacock and Notre Dame get into business in the way that I was describing with a docuseries about a future recruit. All this made-up stuff. It becomes like the quote-unquote Wild West that people were worried about for so many years. In the current environment, one group that I do not think is doing a lot about that is the NCAA. I know that they have reportedly poked around like the Texas NIL deal that involves some kind of shady-seeming charitable tax stuff as well over the last couple of weeks. But I don't think that the NCAA, and this is why I think the political differences between now and then are important, is really going to be in much of a position to go and try to tell a school that they need to get their broadcast partner to rein it in with something they're doing with a recruit. I have some skepticism that even, that governmental authorities are going to do anything about this, because it's hard to get the U.S. Congress or a lot of state houses to do anything these days. But we are sort of in uncharted territory, and maybe it's a little bit Wild Westy, but I think it's definitely better than when players couldn't be paid at all. So if there's mess, and if there's vacuums being filled in this market by companies that I personally find to be really odious, I blame the administrative class in the sport that sat on its hands and didn't do anything to create a more structured system when it knew which direction this was going for years. Just really stupid on their part.
I'm just now placing sort of wild outlier scenarios with particular boosters at particular places that I can think of, and oh my, we're going to have a super fun off season. If you have signed up with us on Patreon, just honestly, I've said this before and people roll their eyes. I like the off season better because it just gets weirder. I mean, at least 4 months a year we have to talk about football because those games are happening. But with this shit on the precipice, we're not even done with realignment, by the way. Everyone thinks that that's over. It's not.
Godfrey,
there's more weird shit's going to happen.
Which school do you think will have a booster or a broadcast partner get involved with it in a really aggressive NIL scheme that results in criminal charges and a later Hollywood optioning for the film rights first? And why do you think it will be Texas A&M?
I mean, isn't that the most obvious one?
That is the most
Depends
obvious.
On what the energy sector does in the next couple of months and / years, and I'm not that well read up on that sector, so I'm curious what oil futures are at right now. One thing I want to talk to you about, though, because you had this in the show notes, and I kind of want to walk this out as well. So Mississippi's NIL law, they have a ban on gambling relationships for athletes.
Yes, they do.
And so this kid's going to go to Jackson State, which is in the state of Mississippi, in the state capital. Campus is right down the street from where they made that law. This is potentially going to stress test an NIL law in a way that we haven't seen yet.
I wouldn't say we haven't seen it yet, because Barstool has an NIL program that it has been running for a few months now, since not long after NIL got started. But it's something I've been wondering about when we talked about, is the NCAA going to bark up this tree? I really don't know personally if a lot of state attorneys general or a district attorney, I don't know how different states would structure this kind of prosecution, would actually go after an athlete for being involved with a company that legally cannot get into the NIL game because of the laws of that state. Whether that's gambling,
let me pause right there.
Alcohol.
I think the variation here is that they would go after the institution, which is a public institution. And while that might be wildly unpopular if it's a power holder in the state, like one of the SEC schools, this is Jackson State we're talking about. How much favor do you think they curry with a bunch of white lawmakers?
I don't know. And I also don't want to, like, I looked up who the Mississippi Attorney General is. Just seems like a horrible person. So I don't want to give her, like, too much credit that she would do the right thing here. But the thing is, there are a lot of people out there who tried to end American democracy a year ago and also think college athletes should be paid. People are complicated in that way.
I will say this before we move on, as an aside. Not this Mississippi Attorney General, but a Mississippi Attorney General was responsible for taking down big tobacco. So good things can come out of Magnolia sometimes.
People are complicated. I'm just telling you.
Shout out Mike Moore. So this is why, to wrap this segment up, we invite you, the SED audience, and those who you would tell to listen to this show, to sit down and not necessarily demand that we leave this with a take. Yeah. This is going to bear further scrutiny. However, if you want to walk away with an idea today, I would walk away with the idea that college football, yet again, I can report for the 700th time, is not burning down. A weird thing happened today. A weird thing will happen tomorrow. I would also like to point out, just for a little levity inside the transition, Alex, that yesterday, like 24 less than 24 hours ago, most of FSU Twitter was angry that people were pointing out Mike Norvell's contract extension that he had just signed for really no fucking reason. He got bumped by a year for reasons I have yet to really understand, okay?
Indeed.
A day later, we have this Twitter Spaces attack on Norvell by those same people at FSU. So you have to define crazy and set a bar when you talk about this sport.
Yeah, I think the natural bridge from this segment to the next is that FSU fans very upset about Mike Norvell losing this player to Jackson State have been in a Twitter Spaces hangout for approximately 4 to 5 hours at this point. It's 4:30 Eastern as we talk. The name of the room is simply Fire Mike Norvell. There are currently 715 people in there. I looked a few times, poked my head in. There were more than 5,000 people in there at different points. And it's just some FSU fans talking shit about how much they don't like Mike Norvell. The man does not have a lot of defenders among those 5,000 people. Another fan base that has been really...
Speaking of Twitter Spaces,
Oregon has had quite a bit going on internally, it seems like, over the last week or so, including a Twitter space that seemed like it lasted... Someone will correct me on this, but like the better part of a whole day, like, and by the whole day I mean like the calendar day, like 24 hours or something like that, involving a bunch of former players and fans and some Oregon media just talking about the future direction of the Oregon football program. And it's interesting because they obviously just hired a coach. Godfrey, you did a good SplitsOnDuo.com Patreon show this morning about some of the media sausage making that led up to Dan Lanning being hired by Oregon. That's the defensive coordinator at Georgia who's going there. It seems like Oregon's having a bit of an identity crisis right now. Does that seem fair to say?
Yeah, and it was kind of weird because I don't want to rehash what we talked about on the Patreon show, but my first reaction, and the show specifically is more about that weird media cycle where there was a report, and then there was a conflicting report, and then there was a delay. I tried to get into why that happens, not about who's right and who's wrong, because obviously Dan Lanning is the next head coach, or the head coach at Oregon now. It's more about how those information channels work, sometimes concurrently, sometimes they're diametrically opposed. It's not necessarily about right and wrong, so if you're interested in that, go check it out. When the news first broke, Alex, I thought, oh, good. Oregon went out and did the thing that I think they should do, which is continue to pursue the candidate that they feel like is the best available and not try and knee-jerk to having hurt feelings over being left for the hometown program for the second time. Willie Taggart did it to go to FSU. He didn't play at FSU. He played at Western Kentucky, but he's from Manatee, Florida, Bradenton, I think. Grew up an FSU fan. Mario Cristobal, much easier to explain. The dude played at Miami. Very, very connected to the city of Miami. His brother's still a cop there. His family's there. Like, he was... Once Miami got their shit together, which they finally did, this was going to happen. We just didn't know if Miami was going to get their shit together. I thought Oregon, having lost these two coaches, would just go, hey, we're going to get the best coach available. We know we're in the woods. We know we're up in the Pacific Northwest. Turns out, Alex, they didn't do that. They got Dan Lanning, who the dude's from Kansas, and he was coaching at Georgia. They wanted Justin Wilcox. They wanted a guy who's from Oregon, who played at Oregon, to do the hometown bit. In fact, I believe it's in the John Canzano piece, Alex. They talked about, like, they were going to have, like, handing out T-shirts and shit at the hiring press conference for Justin Wilcox to say, like, hey, this is an Oregon dude. He is home. He's not going to leave you.
I think that's
But he
that's the idea.
turned them down, which is, honestly, I keep saying this. I said this in the Patreon show. I'm going to say it here. Why did you turn Oregon down to stay at Cal?
Weird,
What
because
the fuck is going
Cal
on?
doesn't seem like a good situation, but like it also
No.
it could be a really. There's all kinds of very innocent explanations for why someone doesn't leave to take a new job somewhere, and it does not have to
Okay.
mean that anything is fundamentally wrong with Oregon. Like, people have relationships, they have schools, they have
Yeah.
nice houses that they don't want to move from in places, and maybe you just don't want to take that job. I think that Oregon fans seem to. I mean, this is going to sound overly monolithic in describing the Oregon fan base, which is not the intent. But some who are on that Twitter space were taking this to mean that people think we're broken. Like, people either they think we're broken, or that our expectations are too high, and you don't want those jobs.
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure that either of those things is true.
No, it's not. Is Notre Dame broken?
No, I don't think so. And I think that Oregon is a great job for Lanning to take over with a lot of talent and a lot of infrastructural advantages. The one thing that I did find kind of weird from the Oregon extended universe is that, and this was, I think, another Canzano report. Guy is extremely plugged in on Oregon and very much worth checking out at OregonLive.com. 14 former Oregon players, many names that you have heard of before, sent a letter to Rob Mullins, the athletic director, that essentially says, over the course of a page of writing, that we're afraid Oregon is losing its identity that made it great, and like losing a connection to its past. And that, in context, is a pretty obvious lobbying effort for Justin Wilcox, which may or may not have been heard, but it does sound like they tried to hire him. But, like, I guess my question about that is, like, didn't we just watch USC go through, like, a 10-year wilderness because they would not do anything except hire USC men to lead them instead of looking for the best candidate at all times? Like, why would you see that if you were an Oregon former player, fan, alum, and be like, yeah, we want that? Is it because you think you're so close to winning a few national championships under Chip and Mark Helfrich that that's just what you have to do? I don't know. But it doesn't. Like, I think Mullen was smart to just go and get the best coach he could find.
My expert analysis after being in this industry for about 20 years is hurt butt. They got a hurt butt. They did not think Mario was going to leave. In fact, if you go through Oregon Twitter and look, like, just go through and search by date up until 2 days before, it becomes painfully obvious that they're isolating Manny. They're out there talking to Mario to make the deal, that they didn't think Mario Cristobal was going to leave. And by the way, Alex, they did think that they were a national title contender this year. A lot of people, like Richard on the show, talk schematically about how, hey, Oregon's good, but this, and this, watch out. And then obviously they got Utah twice. I just used Utah as a verb. I feel very proud of myself. So it is nothing more complex or sinister as hurt butt and feeling like, damn it, this happened to us twice, and we know that Chip wouldn't do it to us, which, by the way, Chip already did it to you. He fucking left. Like, he went to the Eagles.
He did. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of fan bases that have been very hurt lately by coaches leaving because we view our college football teams as kind of extensions of ourselves, and when coaches leave, that stings. And I guess Oregon could understandably be pretty chapped that it's happened 3 times in like 10 years. But
I would have a Twitter Spaces meeting if I'm former players and go, all right, we got a 35-year-old DC who's not from the Pacific Northwest. What's the recruiting going to look like? Oh, and he just hired a non-play calling OC that's a friend of his off of Florida State staff, a staff that has not performed well since they got to Tally. Like, let's ask those questions if you're going to ask questions. I'm not trying to shade or short the Lanning era in Eugene. I think Lanning's a very good defensive play caller. But fuck, y'all. Like, if you want to have big meetings and talk about big things at Oregon, let's talk about Dan Lanning and the deficiencies and how he's going to address those and how fast can he get in. Who's he going to be able to keep? And, like, you got to fight the transfer portal now. There's a lot of major questions. Rather than this Oregon identitarian kind of crap, I would just be way more focused on what this next staff is going to look like and sort of their areas of strength and weakness. It's going to be very different than Mario. Very different.
Also, if any part of this is about fear that if things go well for Dan Lanning, he's going to leave and go back to the Southeast, I think that requires a recalibration of our understanding of how the industry works at this point. There are new rules now about who can lose a coach. Apparently, it's anybody except for like Bama, Ohio State, USC, maybe LSU and Texas. Oklahoma can lose a coach. Notre Dame can lose a coach.
This thing about Ryan Day and the Bears doesn't go away. So I'll just throw that out there. Anybody can get shot in the back.
He shot that down fairly aggressively today, but, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time.
Also, do you know what the old heads like me, the flannel-wearing Gen Xers are saying to you right now?
I don't know.
Dennis Franchione. Do you remember that?
I do.
Left Bama, was the best available candidate, the next hotshot head coach
for Texas A&M.
Bolted for Texas A&M. How weird is that now in 2021 to talk about? So anybody can get got. Why wouldn't the NFL come to Jim Harbaugh right now and say, "Go coach the Raiders"?
Anybody could get got.
Anybody can get got.
Anybody could get got.
Anybody. So if I'm Oregon, you can choose to turn into the skid or flail wildly and probably damage yourself more in the short term. The Canzano piece, or maybe it was John Wilner, pointed out something interesting. Again, to go back to football for a second in the absence of Richard. Young DC hire contrasted with big offensive hire in Los Angeles, pretty big offensive hire in Seattle. I find that to be interesting as well. Is Oregon going to become some sort of like foil to those programs? I thought it was interesting. And also, if you look at it, Alex, they leaned heavily on defensive candidates in the interview process. They wanted a defensive candidate, and then I think Chip got jammed up Rob's ass, to be totally honest with you.
That seems like a counter to Lincoln Riley at USC. That seems like we know to win Pac-12 championship games, we're going to have to muddy the waters a little bit.
The last thing I'll say, and I forgot about this until just now, Justin Wilcox's name has like been pushed before for jobs way outside of the Pacific Coast. If we're looking for reasons why he didn't take the job, what I'm getting at is that maybe he wants to get Cal dressed up and buttoned up, and then maybe he moves on to a Big Ten job or an SEC job.
Maybe so.
Maybe you saved yourself the trouble.
While we've been recording this show, a report from Amanda Kristovich at Front Office Sports. Quote, "The rumor that Jackson State commit Travis Hunter has an NIL deal with Barstool is false, a source close to the program tells Front Office Sports." End quote. Interesting. Sure am glad we hedged about the specifics of that in that last segment that we just recorded. Yeah. It's going to be fascinating, and we urge the lack of jumping to conclusions about that.
If you want to be a smart fan online, on your message board, in your group text, on Twitter about this, act like you've been there before. And if you're listening to my voice, chances are you know the story about Ole Miss and Mississippi State and all that shit with Robert Kondichi. You have seen weirder shit on signing day, America. Acquit yourselves accordingly.
The real pull for Deion Sanders, what would be just like, man, this guy must be the greatest recruiter of all time, would be if there's no NIL deal. And all of the people that are referenced in like the Pete Thamel report and that we have talked to who think that there probably is an NIL angle, if there's none, greatest recruiting coup of all time. FSU should hire him tomorrow, if that's true.
Highly doubt that, but yeah. Hey, if they're just doing it the old school way, I mean, back the car up and open the trunk, you know?
Home field apparel. Speaking of backing,
God, what a transition! Shout out! If I'm going to back a car up and open up a trunk, it's going to be filled with fine home field apparel.
Absolutely, fine home field apparel available at homefieldapparel.com. Homefield is the longest-standing business partner of this program since really before we even existed as a podcast. And while I hope that Connor and the team at their Indianapolis warehouse have had a few weeks to sort of relax, I am sure they haven't. So if you go there and buy more shirts,
Keep killing them.
They're already busy.
Kill 'em.
You know, they're already very busy. They're making a lot of shirts.
Oh, I got my Cincinnati shirt.
Ah, did you?
So
mine must have gotten lost
official,
in the mail.
I guess so. I am an official. It's because of all that Pitt love.
Clearly,
those Big
yes.
East rivalries don't die; they just hibernate for a century. I got my Cincinnati shirt in the mail, which I owe a fancy Instagram. I guess if you're an influencer, you have to put it on the gram, or it didn't happen. So shout out to Connor.
Thank you very much, Connor and team. Homefieldapparel.com. If you Google Split Zone Duo T-shirt, ours will come up right on the Homefield website. It's another great way to support this show. Godfrey, last week while you were gone, we were sort of playing a game where Richard and I were, where we attempted to slot every coaching hire that had been made this year into one of a couple of buckets. You know, you've got your continuity hires, you've got your this guy was willing to take the job hire, you've got your some local experience and a bit of scheme hires, you know, different arbitrary buckets that we made up. Wanted to see what we think the concept is that will attempt to be proven by the hires that have happened in the last week since then. We just talked about Dan Lanning, but I think that was a pretty straightforward, best available, let's play SEC level defense hire by Oregon.
Yeah.
Straightforward. And if Oregon has SEC talent, which it does, then that could work. Ken Wilson is the successor at Nevada for Jay Norvell, who went off to Colorado State. And I sort of think of it as a let's get a coach we can afford hire, but I think Ken Wilson comes via Oregon, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions on his ability, but it's just like Nevada wants to play kind of in the bottom half financially of the Mountain West. And that is going to be a constricting factor in coaching searches.
I think you're exactly right. And sometimes you have to take the calculated risk of, I'm going to go out and take this head coaching job. There are obvious red flags here, but if you're starting a head coaching career, it's very rare that you're going to find someone or you're going to find a position that doesn't have at least some concern. So, Ken Wilson takes a calculated risk. Nevada finds someone who's not going to push and fight them on fundamental financial issues, and that's kind of all she wrote. I mean, he's going to have to reckon with all of the things that Norvell thought to be untenable.
Potentially a lot to reckon with, but who's to say? Coaches have won in worse jobs than Nevada. It has happened before. Speaking of one of those much worse jobs, Mike McIntyre, the former head coach at San Jose State, at Colorado.
Oh, man.
He is taking FIU, which we talked about maybe a month ago as sort of a unique dumpster fire right now in terms of football, athletic department relations, and just like how it got this bad. He is up for the challenge. He has done a hard job before at San Jose State, but this is a lift. Is this fair to say that this was the guy who would take it, or is there a more specific?
You got it, baby. This was a man available who wanted to be a college coach again. Did you notice who he's put on his staff?
No, will you tell me?
His son.
Interesting. That could be fun.
He wants to get his son into coaching. This is a good way to do it. If you have the ability to be an FBS head coach and you're trying to kickstart your son's career, I know you love to talk about this, Alex. FIU, again, you're talking about Nevada having red flags. Nevada's a fucking resort compared to FIU. Mike McIntyre taking this job is as transparent as it looks.
Also, he is from South Florida, which, sure, that probably weighs on.
Mac is?
Yeah, I didn't know this at all. I didn't know this at all, and I think he moved around a lot growing up. He didn't stay. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
but he is from Miami, born in 1965.
I did not see the hiring coverage on it. I just kind of saw the actual news.
Oh no, this is a lift.
Okay, whatever.
This is lifted directly off Wikipedia, which is how you know it's true. Don't worry.
Well, yeah.
I checked it before I put it in the podcast.
He's from a coaching family, and his dad, I believe, was down there coaching at a couple different places in Florida.
How to stop at Miami? Yeah.
Yes, but he grew up here in Nashville, or his formidable years were here in Nashville, and played at Vanderbilt briefly. So, like, I had a conversation with the man before, not this past cycle, but when it didn't look like Derek Mason was going to make it one year that he did, and McIntyre expressed interest in Vanderbilt. I mean, like, so he played kind of that hometown card there too. So
also, do you know Mike McIntyre is, technically speaking, a 2-time National Coach of the Year in FIU's words when they hired him? Got one for his upseason at San Jose State that got him the Colorado job, and for the 2016 Colorado season. They were different Coach of the Year honors, but nonetheless.
It's also weird that, like, as you go through and look at his bio, I don't think it's on here at all. Wow, that's crazy. So his bio has basically been cleaned completely of that assistant coach shit that went on at Colorado. That's nuts.
I'd forgotten all about that. Yeah.
He had an assistant coach in a pretty brutal spousal abuse situation that McIntyre did basically next to nothing to intervene upon. And, I mean, this has been written about. There was a big Sports Illustrated article about it. So, wow. I guess sometimes you can just act like it never happened. Anyways, shout out to him.
It's an old trick in the college football coach hiring book. Duke hired Mike Elko, defensive coordinator at Texas A&M, had been at Notre Dame. What's the idea here? Because I think it's a solid hire, but I'm curious which part of Mike Elko most appeals to Duke.
Elko was vetted by, or more than vetted. Elko had a conversation with Kansas. He was a runner-up at Temple before they hired Manny.
Diaz.
And then I don't really know what the rubric was to go from that to Rod Carey, which obviously didn't work out. So he had been a guy that it was like well known he was going to move on. He had several great statistical seasons working as Jimbo's DC. If you're going to be a DC, work for Jimbo. I mean, that motherfucker's going to hold the ball as long as he can on offense. He's going to make you look good. He's going to shorten possessions for you, for sure. So, it's a little bit of what you think it is, which is we're going to lean into the blue-collar bullshit, and we're going to be an aggressive, defensive-minded team. Remember, we had basically a quarterbacks coach there for the past decade who had a lot of success. I love David Cutcliffe, but we're going to go and do the blue-collar, scrappier thing because we know – I mean, Jesus, I don't want to get too much into recruiting coverage as it happens on nationals on early signing day, but have you seen what North Carolina's bringing in?
No, I haven't.
If you can't compete with that, they have by far the number one class in the league right now.
Okay, yes.
They're kicking the shit out of Florida State and Miami and stuff. So
one thing that I wonder about with a fit like Elko and Duke is that he is an Ivy Leaguer. He played safety at Penn. He got an early, I think his first full-time coaching job was at Penn. He has coached at Wake and at Notre Dame. Some institutional similarity there, maybe with regards to, like, they're not necessarily schools where you can just roll over admissions requirements to get the players you want. Duke, you definitely can't. Like, you have to deal with being a part of a university that puts a premium on academics and on not being seen as necessarily a football factory. That could make the job seem more doable to him. It could make him more attractive to Duke, I think.
I also think this. If you think about the worst possible situation, which is the dude gets fired, because of the Ivy League background, because it's Duke, I think he's going to be afforded a long leash. Hopefully he negotiated a deal that's probably less cash per annual on an annual basis, but a longer-term deal. So he'll have the time that it takes to quote-unquote turn it around. But let's just say they crest 1 year, they go 7-5, then they recede, then he gets fired. None of that performance, what's the word I'm looking for? That trajectory that I just prognosticated does not hurt you at all as a big-time defensive coordinator if that's all you were able to accomplish as head coach at Duke. No one is going to look around in the industry and go, fuck that guy. He'll get hired right away again to be a DC at a major program and possibly make, even more money on an annual basis by that point. So this is not really risky if you're Mike Elko.
That's a great point. Makes sense for him. Last one, Tony Elliott finally takes the UVA job. Some sketchy stuff. Well, not even sketchy. I mean, but like weird stuff here. So Bronco Mendenhall resigns very suddenly. Hope everything's good there, whatever. They get really close with Anthony Poindexter, co-defensive coordinator at Penn State, who had played there, been an All-American there. He told ESPN's Adam Rittenberg, I believe, that the timing wasn't right, backed out or didn't get the job. Richard reported for Sports Illustrated that the Elliott negotiations had hit a snag. Next morning, UVA approves a bunch of money for football facilities. That afternoon, Tony Elliott takes the job. Okay.
Right.
So do we think that what appears to have happened?
Yeah, more or less. I just don't understand this if I'm Tony Elliott.
Tell me why.
because the timeline that you just unfurled there sort of implies that Elliott's representation, Team Elliott, is really pushing Virginia, right? Why are you doing Virginia, dog? Like, what am I missing here? This is a strange one for me. Tony Elliott he's had his name connected to a lot of jobs. I think it's entirely possible he could have found a G5 that has a better chance to create wins. And if you're Tony Elliott, what I just said about Mike Elko does not apply. Okay? Because you were an OC under Dabo, and you were a co-OC for a long time, and your offense got worse after Jeff Scott left.
And black coaches do not get second chances at the same
and you're a
that
black
white coaches
coach.
do.
This is all true. And you're going to go to Virginia? And you're going to peg your one shot on Virginia? And the other thing about this, it's not, but it's a Virginia that just spooked away one of the most consistent head coaches I've ever met. Up and fucking left, right? Like cleaned his shit out overnight and walked the fuck out. So,
well, I will say I get it from
alarm bells are ringing.
I get it from the school's perspective because
it's a coup for them.
I mean, it works. Like Tony Elliott if it works like a home run. He will recruit
you also get to spend the next 9 months.
Offense.
Yeah. You get to run around telling everybody we got Clemson's offensive coordinator in a laissez-faire football environment in Charlottesville.
The one, I guess it's obviously not a big enough question mark that I don't think it was a smart hire, but there are fair reservations maybe about how he does when he does not have an all-world quarterback.
Yeah.
Because he pretty much always did until this year, and it didn't go well. So we'll see. Nothing is a guarantee, but good for Virginia, and we will see what more there was to all of the weirdness surrounding that search. Tony Elliott's former school, Clemson University, has now pretty much emptied out the top-tier coaching staff under Dabo Swinney from the national title run that he had there. Maybe is still in the midst of, who knows. It's the way of the world that when teams are good, their coaches tend to get job offers. Clemson had staff continuity for a really long time, though. And in 3 coaching cycles, we have seen Jeff Scott, offensive coordinator to USF, Brent Venables to Oklahoma just in the last week or two, and Tony Elliott, who had been the co-coordinator with Scott and then took the job himself, to Virginia. Dabo's response is to stick with the Clemson pipeline, the Clemson way. New defensive coordinator, Wes Goodwin, internal promotion. New co-DC, Mickey Kahn, safeties coach, internal promotion. New offensive coordinator, Brandon Streeter, another internal promotion. Lots of recruiting and analyst positions kind of moving around the food chain there, too. The point is that he's backfilling positions with internal people rather than going outside.
Right.
I know that is a point of some contention right now within the Clemson fan base, as is his lack of interest in using the transfer portal, because he seems to really believe in his guys, coaches and players. We spent a lot of years as a media industry praising Dabo for that kind of continuity, for finding his guys and letting them cook. It obviously served him very well. So I think some benefit of the doubt is in order. But do we have doubts?
Yes. I kind of always have doubts about Dabo, because I think that he's now in a race with himself, and he's in a race with his legacy. And he's trying to figure out, as an Alabama man, what he does next. That's not really a tease to like post Saban retirement. It's more just, I think he's at a crossroads, and I also think he resents. He's not good with criticism.
Not really. Though I'm not either, so I get it.
Anything that's different about Clemson, I think anytime you point that out, it really chafes him. And I also think that like he's not hard to work for, Alex. I think he's idiosyncratic. And I think that you have to be a particular kind of coach to work for him. I think that's why you haven't seen so many people filter through in recent years. Also, he does, to his credit, take really good care, especially of his coordinators, which is why his coordinators stick around for so long. So here's what's great about this. It's not often you get a real clear referendum on a multinational title-winning coach's legacy. And that's what we get now. We get to see how much of this was a system, how much of this was Dabo Swinney as the author, and how much of this was just probably what probably closer to the truth in my opinion, was the confluence of events. A little bit of good luck, a little bit of good timing, a little bit of hard work, a little bit of good recruiting, a shit pot full of money that Clemson hadn't had before to build up facilities, etc. All of those things are probably what built this. But now in Clemson, you're betting it was all Dabo and Dabo's system and Dabo's coaches and Dabo's players. And we're going to find out because the ACC, look, based on the performance of the ACC the last couple of years, you knew the center wouldn't hold. Miami's the latest one to say, fuck it, we're not standing for this anymore. We're restarting everything from the ground up. We should be as good as Clemson. So there are programs gunning for him. It was North Carolina, it hasn't happened yet. It was Florida State, it hasn't happened yet. Now it's Miami. Eventually, someone's going to have the strength enough to challenge Clemson, who, by the way, didn't have a great season anyway.
Dabo has resisted the way college football is changing in some respects.
Yes.
And we talk about how those kinds of coaches who don't give in are on the way out. And we've mentioned this with Urban Meyer, with Gary Patterson. Dabo may be the one true exception to that. The thing that I'm thinking about here is that he has been totally resistant to bringing in transfers for Clemson. I think you could count on one hand how many players they've actually played who he has brought in the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years over transfers. It's an extremely small number. And I kind of suspect that that comes from the same place as wanting to be internal with your staff backfilling. The thing that I wonder about is whether or not it's possible forever to do business that way. Maybe 2021 was an aberration. Maybe it wasn't. Also, to give Dabo some credit, like, it has worked for him. And I think that on some of the stuff that he has put his foot in his mouth with before, like if you professionalize college football, I'm going to leave for the NFL. He sounds like maybe he's grown a little bit there. Not that he really gives a shit if I, a podcast host, think he's grown. But, like, so maybe he will evolve somewhat on the transfer thing. Maybe he doesn't have to.
Right.
But it's a bet on, like, Dabo Swinney being I'm not going to say being God, but it's a bet on Dabo knowing better than everybody else in college football about how to build a winner in 2022. That's the bet. Because Alabama's playing this game. They just took Georgia Tech's best player. They took one of Ohio State's best players last year, one of Tennessee's best players. Ohio State's playing this game. Clemson is not playing this game.
He's betting on himself, and basically, so in other words, you could say this is an exercise in, like, hey, does the authoritarian system work in 2021 and beyond? Think about how different this conversation would be.
I don't even think he's an authoritarian, though.
Oh, I mean, I've been in the building.
Okay,
yeah,
well, you know better than me.
He's. I mean, you know the old joke. Well, it's a parent joke. So, like, you know, this is a dictatorship. It's a benevolent dictatorship. It can be a malevolent one if you keep testing me. It's like an old dad joke. He's a benevolent dictator, but I mean, look, dude, he's out. He's trying to fucking baptize kids on the practice fields. Like, this is Dabo's way, or that's it. So he's betting on a system. And I'll be honest with you. You bring up a good point. You're talking about Alabama. Hey, they're playing this game. You could be a dictator. Just be a smart one. College football still really affords a lot of leeway to authoritarians. So it's not like that style is going away. You just got to be smart about it. So maybe it's not a referendum on the dictatorship part of it as it is like, look, the dude's a cult of personality. Just call it. He's built a cult of personality, and we're really gonna test it in the next 2 years. Because you and I may not even be having this conversation, certainly not in this context, if Clemson right now has won the ACC and they're the fucking 3 seed in the playoff, as usual, right?
We would not be. We would 100% not be.
But I'm saying if all things are the same, Radakovich leaves, right? Elliott leaves, Venables leaves, but they happen to be the 3 seed in the playoff. I don't know if we're talking about this the same way.
You have referred to Radakovich, Dan Radakovich, the athletic director who just went to Miami, as a co-author of their success.
Yes.
I won't keep us here forever, but what did you mean by that? Because I didn't really make you explain it when you said it on this show some time ago.
If you're not familiar, Clemson has a program called IPTAY, I Pay 10 a year. They're very good at mobilizing young alumni. there were a lot of things lacking that needed to be modernized at Clemson. They had the money, they had the willingness, and they knew that they were situated really well geographically in recruiting, their proximity to Atlanta, sort of sitting almost like a stealth mission inside of the SEC. That was sort of Clemson because they're right there, but they don't have to play that schedule. I'm describing some football things, but what Radakovich saw when he got there as Dabo was building momentum was, hey, there's commitment to building this up financially. So that's exactly what he just got hired to do, the exact same thing at Miami. Like, hey, there's money here. We're not asking you to knock on doors in a dry area. There is a willingness to spend if you feel assured that your money is going somewhere. I learned this from my wife because she worked in alumni relations and she worked in nonprofit development. You have to make the check writer feel like there's an effectiveness at hand. And that's what Radakovich was fucking brilliant at, is brilliant at.
It's a half-formed thought, but one thing that caught my eye about the coach elevations that Dabo did was that they have been pioneers, though that is maybe not it's a weird word choice for this, but Dabo was pretty out front on being one of the coaches who started paying coordinators a ton of money. Like, I think Brent Venables was either the first or very close to the first $2 million coordinator in college football. Dave Aranda was another one who was up there. And they've invested a lot in like their assistants, so that's been part of their staff retention. It caught my eye that they're paying, and this was via Grace Rayner of The Athletic, they're paying their new coordinators way less than their old coordinators. Like, less than half.
That's normal.
It's normal, but I guess my point was like, I don't think Clemson lacks for money or commitment to hire coaches. So it almost furthers the point that, damn, like, Dabo really does just believe in his guys, because, like, I have to think that even with Radakovich leaving, there's money in the banana stand if he wanted to just go and buy a highly accomplished, proven coordinator, and he didn't.
No, and I think he's, without his AD, there's a transition in the front office, so to speak, and also, if you are, look, I think part of this is, and you don't really know what the internal dynamics are because there's been so much change the last couple of weeks, Alex. I would posit a guess that what Dabo is doing is saying, these are going to be my guys. I'm bringing them in. I'm making this decision unilaterally. No one has any influence in this whatsoever. However, you don't have to pay them that much at first. So it's a little bit of a salve. Now, if they go back and have a 10-win season next year, I guarantee you those coordinators are going to get a pretty significant bump. Because the first, I tell you what, actually, with the new coordinators on both sides of the ball, Clemson won how many games this year?
9. I think they went 9-3. Clemson won 9-3.
Right. So let's just say they jump back and win the ACC next year. All right. Chances are, if they do that, they're going to be outstanding on one side of the ball or the other, or maybe both. The first thing that's going to happen is those coordinators are going to start getting mentioned.
Wait, Clemson won 10 games. Good Lord. They won 10.
Holy shit.
They won 10.
This is a college football podcast.
Sequencing is insane. I can't believe Clemson won 10 games. You just forget about things. They won 10 games. Unbelievable.
And yet it's being written off as a total woeful
complete failure. Yeah,
disappointment.
complete failure. Pretty funny.
How dare you underperforming bastards.
Wait. We've got a data problem on the sheet that I'm looking at.
It's 9-3.
It's 9-3. For some reason,
we were right the first
for some
time.
reason,
3
Sport
losses.
Reference has Clemson at 10-2, and that's not accurate. But I pulled it up as a double check.
They lost to your beloved Pitt Panthers.
They lost 3 games. They lost to Georgia, they lost to Pitt, and they lost to NC State in overtime.
Just as a quick aside,
I can't believe Sport Reference failed me. They never get things wrong.
Just as a quick aside, do you know what this actually is? It's not, well, it's us not knowing something, but it's also it's the cloud, it's the weird perception cloud that happens in the ACC. It's kind of like the Pac-12. It's kind of like when Boise starts the season at like 19, but they lose that like one big P5 game they have, but then they go 11-1, and then like around Christmas you're like, oh shit, Boise's like 11-1 or 10-2, and they just won the Mountain West. That's kind of what Clemson did this year, and that's not a referendum on Clemson so much it is as the assiness of that conference.
Tend to agree with you. Clemson, we're going to see what's what. 2022 is going to definitely be a bit of a show your cards on the table kind of year. Steven, vested interests brought to us by our friends at Prize Picks. Results on Pick'em so far this season. I'm 0-3 last week while you were DNP coach's decision, so I'm 15-28 on the year. Richard was 1-2. He's 25-18. You're 14-23 on the year, so congrats. I think you're inches ahead of me on winning percentage. The public was
Terrible.
1-0 last week and is 10-5 over 15 weeks, dominating. This week's plays. I want to start with maybe the most fun college football player this year, certainly proportional to the level of attention he's gotten. Everywhere except Splits and Duo. We've talked about Bailey Zappi, the Western Kentucky quarterback, playing App State in the Boca Raton Bowl. The Prize Picks folks have the number at 389.5 passing yards. Where are you going?
I went over.
He goes over
Just for
most of
the-
the time for
yeah.
that number. Yeah.
I went over just simply because why not?
Yeah, his
Like-
worst game of the year was around 280 passing yards, so he's...
There's a chance. Here's what I'm hoping for. Here's my better's logic. I'm hoping for you haven't watched this guy all year. This is maybe the only chance you are going to watch this guy. Enjoy it. He'll have a big show.
Yeah, so I had the over, but I'm changing my pick because this is about competing with you to the under. Zach Keatley,
You
the
son
offensive
of a
coordinator,
bitch.
has left for Texas Tech, and the App State defense is good, better than most
They
of
are.
what they've seen this year, certainly better than the UTSA defense that he's racked up a lot of yards on last week. So let's do that. The public is on the over as well. I'm really excited about the Independence Bowl, Steven. This is BYU and UAB. I think a very attractive game. Jaron Hall, BYU quarterback, passing yards number 274.5. I am going under here because I think that
We're both going
UAB has some big play problems in the passing game, but I suspect that BYU's path here will be to try to man ball it a little more than normal, given UAB's... Actually, it doesn't really make sense as I sort through it. I went under because it felt like a lot of yards. I could actually make a case that it makes more sense for them to try to throw over the top in this game because that's UAB's weakness, but... Let's go under because I already wrote it down on our show notes, and sometimes you just want to do that.
I love that logic. Let's go under. We'll ride on that one together.
This is probably my favorite of the week, and sometimes we like to do these. Jake Haener at Fresno State. By the way, he's still the quarterback there. He came out.
Yeah,
and said
I wanted you to clarify this. He
Yeah.
is transferring, but
and I think he's widely expected to play the bowl game, though not everyone knows for sure. Rush yards against UTEP in the New Mexico Bowl, 0.5. Remember, sacks count against rushing yards.
I have to think he will get past like a broke. He will run for a first down on like a 2nd and 6 in a pocket collapse.
The thing is, I'm thinking they're trying pretty hard to keep him from running on the basis that, remember, he had that midsection issue in their first game this year, and he has literally
Love that description of an injury.
not
Could
their
mean
first
anything.
game. It was their fourth game. It was against UCLA in
Had a
non-conference.
midsection injury.
this
Could
year
have
he
been
has
a hip
one-
flexor. Could have been your dick.
Could have been anything. He had 1 yard rushing this year by the NCAA's accounting. Now, is
I'm
it
going for
silly
it.
that sacks are not, that
Rushing
sacks are counted against rushing totals? Yeah, very silly. It's a passing play. It should count against your passing yards. But this is the world we live in. I am going under because I don't think that he's going to double his season rushing total in one game, which is
Bowls are weird.
he would need one-
Weird
he would
things.
need 1
Weird
yard
things
for that.
happen in bowls.
they.
What if he's trying to keep a drive alive at the very end to come back or something like that?
I don't know. Then he's probably throwing.
right.
It's an interesting.
This is why I have a
situation.
terrible winning position. This
He-
is why I'm bad at this.
I had said on the show, or maybe it was on Patreon, keep your eye out for a kind of WKU situation at Washington where Kalen DeBoer goes to be coach, and maybe he's going to bring his quarterback and maybe a receiver, Jalen Cropper, who's been really good for Fresno State, who went to the portal. Haener came out and said that he had planned to do that. He planned to go to Washington with Kalen DeBoer, but ultimately did not. He has a relationship with Jeff Tedford. There was some reporting about academic qualification issues, and I have no idea. But if the Jeff Tedford hire for Fresno State was a key factor in them getting 1 more year out of Haener, then I would argue it's already a successful hire because
Absolutely,
they're
especially
winning
if he
9
finds
games
the right.
this year.
Yeah,
like they're
if he keeps him and finds an assistant to hand it off to in 2 years, brilliant.
Yeah, works out just fine. Thank you, Prize Picks, for supporting this show this season. It is the easiest way that you can play daily fantasy sports. You're against a person at a computer setting a number and trying to go over under that number as opposed to competing against thousands of people spreadsheeting their way to try to screw you out of victory just against one person, which I greatly prefer. It's available in most U.S. states. One word, get it wherever you get apps. Great alternative also if you want to bet props, but you can't. You can do it. You can do something very similar in the Prize Picks DFS app. Please play with care, and if you use the code SZD, you'll get not just a deposit match, but the feeling of making us look good to our partners. So thanks very much if you have given it a try on our account this year. And Steven, with that, I think it's tasting menu time for an exceptionally busy weekend of postseason football.
Technically, you can't have a tasting menu if all you've done is take everything available. That's just a kitchen. So this is the kitchen because we're going through pretty much any college football possible that's left for you to consume. I am a fan of this. And if you're from North Louisiana, sweep the kitchen. You know what that means. So Friday has 2 bowl games this Friday? Am I reading this right?
Friday has 2 bowl games. Also, Richard has something on here that says Richard has something he needs to admit, which Richard had to run. He had to run out today, but I'm.
Do you know what I think it is? Is that, and I'm just going to go ahead and say this in his absence, Alex.
What is it?
We haven't addressed the fact that Alabama did not do what he thought they would do this year and might win another.
I think
national
that might
title.
be it. Alabama went 11 or 12-1. Yeah.
So point that out because he said multiple regular season losses. So guess what? He was fucking wrong, and I have not raked his ass about this at all. I was ready to rake him over the coals.
If they don't win the playoff, he's going to try to claim that he meant 2 in general. And I don't want any listeners of this program to let him get away with that if he attempts.
There is someone, there were 2 listeners who I had asked a question about, and they dug through and clipped it out about something else arbitrary last year. Please, if you're listening, clip out the initial argument from the summer. Do you remember when it was? I want to say it was July.
That seems about right. Yeah, we'll find the SEC preview.
We got into it. I made fun of him for like a month about it. I need to know the terms that he sets with his own words because I feel like he's already renegotiated those terms once because we were so certain that Alabama was going to lose down the stretch and they didn't, and he was going to claim that as a win. So I need someone out there to hold his feet to the fire.
I definitely want to find out what this was that he had to admit. Friday, anyway, the Bahamas Bowl. This is these all times are God's Central Time. Got to be honest, I'm probably not super into this one. Middle Tennessee and Toledo at 11 a.m. It is fun because it's weekday football. I did a bowl watchability rating based on some truly serious scientific formulas for 538 this week, and this one came out near the bottom. If you're going to watch every bowl game, more power to you. I respect that lifestyle completely. We love college football here. But if you are prioritizing, this would not be the one at the top of my list. Northern Illinois.
Here's what's sad.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch more of this game than probably any other on here because it'll be on mute in my office during business hours. The good game we're about to talk about, I think some of my family's in town this weekend for the holidays. I'm not going to be able to watch the Cure Bowl, which is a good football game.
It is a good football game. It's Northern Illinois and it's Coastal Carolina. 2 teams that like you could be forgiven for being a little iffy about because, again, Northern Illinois won the MAC but did so with a seriously negative point differential. Might not actually be that good. We'll find out next year. I don't really know. But either way, a great year for Thomas Hammock. Against Coastal, which has a good record, won a lot of games, scored a lot of points. But every time Coastal played a team with a pulse, it was not inspiring.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I'm into it. I'm going to watch this game if I can.
Coming off of the MAC championship, I kind of like NIU here.
Maybe kind of. I do like this game. I like both of these teams. It's just it could be kind of a chaotic fun rather than like a
especially for 2 smashy teams to be this chaotic.
Very much so. They're both good. There's going to be a lot of running and not necessarily a lot of throwing in this game unless NIU's safety rotations dictate that Grayson McCall keeps the ball and throws it, or whoever's playing quarterback for Coastal in this game. Saturday, Boca Bowl, Western Kentucky versus App. In on this one, 11 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
In on
we talked about that one.
Yep, very much in on
definitely.
that. The Celebration Bowl this year, 11 a.m. as well. Also into this. I think that this is a good Celebration Bowl. Remember, that game did not happen because both the MEAC and SWAC did not, as conferences, have seasons in the 2020 bowl window.
Yes, they both played in the spring.
I think that it's kind of a fun both new school but also old school matchup. These schools played a couple times in the early 90s. They have not played since. They both have a lot of history. I think there's 8 Pro Football Hall of Famers between these schools, including Walter Payton. By the same token, they haven't been here in a while. And Jackson State these are 2 teams that have never played in the Celebration Bowl, which is only about a half decade old. But North Carolina A&T kind of owned the spot in this game from the MEAC and is now gone in the Big South. Jackson State's having an amazing year. They're 11-1. South Carolina State is 6-5, but dominated in conference. I'm just into it. I think it'll be a fun game.
Cool. It doesn't sound good on paper, but the New Mexico Bowl at 1:15 p.m. Central. Oh, wow. Don't cut that out. That's me just committing a cardinal sin against God's time zone. Fresno State and UTEP. If Hainer plays like we talked about, I think this is going to be a game. If you haven't watched UTEP all year, watch them. It's about as nice as I can get about UTEP. They had a fun year.
They did.
We'll leave it at that. Good football game again. Independence Bowl. We already talked about it. UAB, BYU at 2:30. The Lending Tree. Well, it's a styles clash at 4:45. Liberty and Eastern Michigan.
In a bowl called the Lending Tree Bowl.
That's about all I got. EMU is gritty and probably almost certainly incapable of defending all the skill positions that Liberty boasts.
Liberty being in a mortgage provider sponsored bowl game fits.
Mwah, chef's kiss. I'm doing the chef's kiss.
Yeah.
The Jimmy Kimmel Bowl.
The Jimmy
whatever.
Kimmel LA Bowl. Yeah.
Whatever. Two
Have
teams.
we mentioned how Disney owns a lot of the postseason in college football?
Blech.
There's an example. Yes.
Two teams that I have followed this year, two teams I have a natural interest in. Utah State on the rebound under Blake Anderson. Fuck you, Alex, for making fun of me about that because I was totally right.
You were.
They won the Mountain West. And Oregon State, another little scrappy, little workman-like program up there in the Pacific Northwest. We might have more on Oregon State coming soon. TBD.
We do.
I love that we're teasing
No,
that. That's
we
hilarious.
do, as a matter of fact. We, on Patreon, the $10 and $50 Patreon contributors to this show, we put it to a vote. We picked 5 schools and said, hey, we're going to do kind of a deep dive episode into what makes this program interesting. Oregon State won. We have done previous ones on Northwestern and on Southern Miss. We are doing an Oregon State one. We plan to record it this week. It will be out soon. We are looking forward to it.
Okay.
Nightcapper on Saturday, last one of the weekend, New Orleans
Another
Bowl.
good game.
Another good one. Louisiana and Marshall. The G5 Bowls this weekend are very, very strong for the most part.
This happens like throw out last year because of the weirdness, but this happens like once, I would say like 1 out of every 3 bowl seasons, you get really ideal dynamic matchups where if it's a G5 and a P5, like it'll be interesting for a styles thing, or 2 good G5s about the same caliber. Here you have that. I don't think, look, just because Napier's gone, you're going to see the same Louisiana team. The new head coach is Michael DeSormo. He is stepping into some fucking huge shoes, man. Former Cajuns, if you couldn't tell by the name, he's got an EUAX. Stepping into some massive shoes, filling Billy Napier. This is like, weirdly, Alex, kind of a must-win if you're him. You don't want to start
I don't
your
know about
tenure.
that, but yeah.
Dude, you don't want to start your tenure like this. Charles Huff and Marshall, they're scrappy. I dipped in and kind of watched a couple games of theirs this year where they were playing good competition. They're there. They're just not there yet.
They're close. They lost 3 in a row early, where 2 of them could have pretty easily been wins. They finished 7-5, which wasn't probably what they wanted, but
they're going to be
close.
good next year for sure.
I agree. I think Marshall is one of the, assuming that they're still in Conference USA next year, is one of the top teams in that league.
Oh yeah.
FCS semifinals this weekend. Montana State. We are going whole hog literally on this week's tasting menu. We're just giving you a lot of content here. Montana State and South Dakota State, 1 p.m. Saturday. MSU just destroyed Sam Houston, which had been the undefeated defending national champion. They have been in the playoffs a bunch, but have not made the semis until 2019, which was the last fall FCS postseason. Now 2 in 3 years. South Dakota State lost to Sam Houston in the spring title game back earlier this year, you'll remember. So whoever wins this game will go and probably be a fairly heavy underdog against either North Dakota State or James Madison. That's the other semifinal. That's on Friday night. And that's just a good damn football game. Like, that's probably better than like 32 of the 42 or 41 FBS bowls. Like, that's just a good game. If you like good football, that's very good.
You feel like people are clicking on this? Do you feel like we're there, like with the FCS, or do you feel like we got to do more work?
How do you mean?
Like, I just don't know if we're getting enough people engaged in all this stuff.
Yeah,
like,
I don't know. I
feel
thought about it. We could have stood to probably do a bit more FCS this season than we have.
Right.
But yeah, it'll be a thing to go back and check the tape on in the off season. There's a lot of
So your Final Four is a nice mixture of like
punchy and established.
Yeah, the other semifinal game is a beast. But yeah, I feel like you could easily end up, and almost probably will end up with, I mean, if you count South Dakota, you're going to end up with a sort of fresh new face against a stalwart in the championship game.
You're absolutely going to. That will be the case. Inevitably, no matter who wins those games, the Division II championship. This is 8 p.m. Saturday. It's Ferris State against Valdosta State. Ferris destroyed Shepherd, and Valdosta beat Colorado School of Mines, RIP to the Orediggers, by a field goal to get here. Straight up rematch of the 2018 game. They play this at the McKinney ISD Stadium, not far from Dallas. Basically, a small FBS stadium that a high school team plays in, or that multiple high school teams play in North Texas. A little bit of trivia, Godfrey. 2018, Valdosta's coach was Kerwin Bell. He scooted off to be USF's offensive coordinator after that. They won the game, by the way. Valdosta did, to win the national title that year. He reemerged with Western Carolina as the head coach this year. The new Valdosta coach is Gary Goff. He also played at Valdosta. Can you guess under whom?
Oh, man. Is it Leach?
Yes, as well as Hal Mummy.
Yeah.
He was on the Mummy, Leach, Valdosta teams that you
That's
can
right.
read
That's
about.
right. Hal was the head coach. Leach was the OC.
Yep, you can read about that in The Perfect Pass, a book that on Hal Mummy's recommendation to me I once read.
It's
a
on
good
my
book.
bookshelf.
Good
somewhere
football
up
book.
here.
Yeah, I think maybe my favorite football book. But here's what's funny.
It's like a Mike Leach story that's not completely full of shit because it's not written by Mike Leach.
Pretty much, yeah. Honestly, it's a great point. The author was able to kind of sift through some of that. Here's what's shocking. Do you know how Valdosta plays football? Like what their offensive identity is?
They run
the thing. They run the ball.
I know that they don't run the air raid anymore. I do not know what their actual system is right now.
Which is, you would typically, like, I almost didn't even look it up. When you have a guy who played for Leach and Mummy, that's just kind of what he's going to do when he's a coach. No, Valdosta runs the ball. I don't really understand it.
Do they run out of the air raid?
Would have to go back and look, but they run the ball. They're run
Well,
pass.
damn it! Guess who's watching this weekend? Because Valdosta is this weird point of Georgia pride.
Like basically Florida. It's a suburb of Jacksonville.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I'm gonna be honest with you. It's the bottom of the fucking state, but it is a weird. Like, okay, let me rephrase that. It's a point of Georgia pride that isn't the part of Georgia that's not Atlanta or the mountains. And so, growing up a Southern fan, like we always kind of had a kinship with Valdosta. Also, if you're a Falcons fan, Jesse Tuggle. That's all I have to say.
Division III championship. This is the Stag Bowl, Friday night, 6 p.m. Mary Hardin-Baylor against North Central. That's in Illinois. Mary Hardin-Baylor is in Texas. This is the defending champ from 2019, North Central, against the one from 18, which is the last two titles that have been contested in Division III. Also, Mary Hardin-Baylor won in 2016, but as we have noted before, that title was vacated for the crime of a coach letting a couple of players use his car. So this is power on power. Power on power. Division III tends to be power on power. There is a lack of parity at that level of college football. Seriously.
That's fair.
Like if people think Alabama runs FBS, like along with like Ohio State or whoever, which
it's pretty lopsided. You're right.
It's pretty lopsided. Yeah.
Pretty lopsided.
The NAIA championship, 5 p.m. Saturday. Two Iowa schools, Morningside and Grandview. Grandview won in 2013. Morningside had it in 18 and 19. So is the two-time fall defending champion. Lindsey Wilson won in the spring in 2020. For some reason, and it's not for some reason, it's because it got established a long time ago. Iowa is a serious NAIA football state. They care about it. There's room in Iowa for not just the Hawkeyes and the Cyclones and UNI and maybe a couple of other NCAA schools, but not many. A lot of good NAIA football in Iowa.
The one that shocks me about Iowa is the next one, Alex, which is the JUCO championship, because you have Iowa Western against New Mexico Military at 7 p.m. on Friday night. Another Iowa school, but notably missing some of the JUCO state stalwarts like Mississippi, Kansas, California. Like, this is a very interesting matchup in the finals not to have one of the usual suspects in there.
It is. New Mexico Military is sort of a non-service academy,
clearinghouse sort of deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
But a JUCO, but technically a JUCO. It's not like Hargrave in Virginia.
So that's the whole suite of. I think there's actually like lower divisions of JUCO as well, and there's probably some club football.
Christ, dude, you got it all.
But
I'm very impressed with you.
We think we've got it just about. We've got to roll. We will be back with the three of us. We expect very soon. Looking forward to talking with you all over the holiday season. Hope you have
Morningside.
A wonderful
Fuck
December.
Grandview.
Go Morningside. That's it. Yeah, I think the Morningside Mustangs. Don't ask me why I know that.
Sounds good to me. I've never been to Iowa.
It's a party trick to know the names of small college athletic department mascots.
It is at the coaching convention, let me tell you.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll see you very soon. Appreciate you.